Hi, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about what's your best retirement date. My name is Tammy Flanagan, and some of you may know me from prior webinars or from other places you may have seen me. I do write some of the columns for NARFE magazine, and I write a weekly column for govexec.com as well. So I'm happy to be here, hopefully to share some information that you'll find useful in planning your retirement and planning your best retirement date. I want to thank NARFE for inviting me back again to present the webinar for you. And I also wanted to remind you that these webinars are all archived on the NARFE website at the Federal Benefits Institute. Following today's broadcast, we will have an online chat session as we normally do, and you'll be able to ask your questions, and hopefully I can provide the answers for you during that hour following today's session. If you don't get your question answered, because oftentimes we have many questions that come in, you remember that you can always contact the Federal Benefits Office at NARFE at fedbenefits@narfe.org. So that's another place to go and get your questions answered. I think that's all I want to tell you about for housekeeping. So let's go ahead and start with today's webinar called Your Best Retirement Date. So before we start with the nuts and bolts of choosing your best retirement date, I wanted to give you a little bit of background about how this whole idea of the best retirement date came about. Just like a lot of things that get some media attention, they kind of take on a life of their own. Years ago, I met Mike Causey, who wrote for the Washington Post, and he had heard that the FBI had a best retirement date that they shared with their employees. Well, I had worked at the FBI, and he got in contact with me after I left there, and we were discussing all the things we taught our employees when they were planning to retire to make sure that they got the most out of their benefits. So he shared that with the readers of his column, and that's where the best date to retire idea was born. So there is some truth to it. There is some things to think of. There are some things to think about as you're choosing your best retirement date, but there are best dates throughout the year. So what's the best date for you might be different than what's the best date for your neighbor. So that's what I want to point out to you today is what are some of the things you want to consider as you're choosing when you want to retire. Now again, before we get too serious with all this best date information, I wanted to share this cartoon with you that I found in my archives. This is dating back many years in the Close to Home cartoon. So in this cartoon, you can see the husband is saying to his wife that he's been going over their finances, and he's decided that the retirement income they're going to have is going to be either around $2,000 a month or $42,000 a month, depending on whether or not they win the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes. So hopefully that's not how you're planning your retirement, waiting to win the lottery, but instead you're planning ahead for your civil service or FERS retirement, how to spend your TSP savings, and when to claim Social Security. So hopefully you're not counting on the lottery to have financial security in the future, although that would be nice, wouldn't it? On this slide, I have an illustration to point out the fact that some of you listening are probably under the CSRS retirement system or CSRS offset, and many of you are probably under FERS. So the big difference between CSRS and FERS when it comes to planning for retirement is planning for one large source of income, or the CSRS retirement, which generally stands by itself, versus planning on three different retirement benefits in the form of the FERS basic retirement benefit, your Social Security benefit, as well as the proceeds that you're going to take out of your TSP account. So for FERS employees, you typically are going to be planning on three different dates to turn on those benefits. So when we think about retiring, you might be retiring all at once, or you might be doing it in stages. You might retire from federal service and go right back to work in the private sector or become self-employed. In those cases, when you have a second career, you may not be taking money out of your TSP account right away, and you certainly won't be claiming Social Security yet if you're still going to continue to work, especially if you're under 66 years old. So when you're thinking about when's the best time for you to retire, you've got to think about some of the things that might be a factor, might play a role in making that decision. So when we look at the end of the year, in the north of the country it's the winter time, so that doesn't seem like a good time to retire if there's bad weather, although it might be nice not to have to go out and commute in the snow if you have snow in your part of the country. But the end of the year is a very popular time to retire. In fact, it's the most popular time for federal employees to retire, and it mostly has to do with accumulation of your annual leave. Your sick leave counts towards your length of service in your retirement calculation, but your unused annual leave balance gets converted to a cash payment. So the more annual leave you have on the day of separation, the more generous that final check's going to be. So in order to maximize that lump sum payout of annual leave, some employees will work till the end of the leave year. So that way they've carried over leave from the previous year, and then they've accumulated up to maybe 200 or 208 hours additional annual leave in the last year that they work. So I've seen some folks cashing out over 400 hours of annual leave or more at the time of their retirement at the end of the year. Then you get the check in the following year, and most of it's going to be paid at the next year's pay rate because it has to be paid by payroll at the salary you would have earned if you could have used the leave. So those are some real good reasons to think about the end of the year to maximize that lump sum payout of annual leave. Some of you might wonder, should I just take my leave and go out whenever it's expired? Well, that would be called taking terminal leave, and federal employees are discouraged from doing that. But you are certainly able to maximize the lump sum payment, and by retiring at the end of the year, that would be about the largest payout you could achieve. Now, the summertime might also be a nice time to retire for the weather, but it also could be a good time to retire tax-wise, kind of splitting the difference between the first half of the year and the second, knowing that while you're still working, you can still contribute to your TSP account. You can still take advantage of the flexible spending accounts, which are both nice tax advantage ways to end up your career. Then the second half of the year converts over to retirement income, which might be a little less than your full salary. So for tax purposes, you're kind of easing into that life after retirement. So you might want to consider maybe the end of June or the end of May or somewhere in the spring or summer as your best retirement date for you, especially if you're not trying to maximize that lump sum leave payment. Anytime, any month, there are good dates to retire. So I want to go over some of the basic criteria that you should think about when you're trying to decide when's the best time to retire. You might have work-related reasons for retiring. Maybe you want to finish up this big project, and as soon as that's done, that might be your best retirement date. Maybe you're retiring for family reasons. Maybe your spouse is retiring and you want to join them, or maybe you want to help with child care for your grandchildren. So there could be any number of personal reasons as well as financial reasons why you plan to retire when you do. So don't worry too much about it, but some of these tips might help you really narrow down the date. The Office of Personnel Management, of course, is who currently processes your retirement application. And they process a lot of retirement applications every single month. You can see a little snapshot from this year and a little bit of last year as well as to how many retirement applications might be coming into OPM in a typical month. You can see there in some months it's well over 5,000 retirement applications are received, and in other months it's well over 10,000 or more. So that's a lot of work for OPM to be doing, and in every single month they process just about as many claims as they receive. But yet there's still a backlog of claims because some of them have extra work that has to be done, whether it's assessing a court order, or maybe it's missing documentation, or maybe it's just the volume that came in that month has put them a little bit behind. So keep in mind that there's always going to be an inventory at OPM, and for your purposes, plan on there being a 60-day processing period on average before your retirement claim is in its full format. So we'll talk about that as we go through this example coming up. When you're thinking about retiring and you have Social Security and TSP and your FERS or SERS benefit, I want to start with just that basic government pension, whether it's your CSRS or your FERS retirement benefit or retirement annuity as it's sometimes called. That's where we're going to begin, because that's what's going to help you have your health insurance and your life insurance for the rest of your life. So this sort of lays the foundation for your life after retirement. So we're going to start off by just focusing on the best date to claim your CSRS or your FERS retirement benefit. So for that, it depends somewhat on how much service you might have when you separate. So for those of you who might only have a few years of federal service, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe even 15 years of government service by the time you plan to retire, choosing one date over another is not going to have as big of an effect. It's not going to matter so much. The reason is because if you only have 5 or 10 years of service, your retirement benefit is probably only worth 5 or 10% of your high 3 average salary. So that small monthly check could be worth less than a 2-week paycheck. For you, your retirement is probably going to be more based on retirement savings, maybe a pension from other work that you've done, and your Social Security. So choosing that specific date is not going to play as big of a role as it might for someone with a lot more service. Those of you who have anywhere from 10 to 20 years of service when you retire, now your retirement benefit's getting a little larger, and you don't want to necessarily lose a month of benefits by choosing the wrong date. But it can go one way or the other depending on what other factors are playing in your decision. So I'd say it's a little more flexible. But for those of you who have what I would call a full career of federal service, more than 20 years, maybe 30, maybe even 40 years by the time you retire, then that monthly retirement benefit can be thousands of dollars. And by choosing the wrong date, you could forfeit that first month of benefit. So I want to make sure that you understand how your benefit commences, what factors are used in determining the starting date of your civil service or your FERS retirement benefit. So to explain this, let me show you 1 month. And I picked January because it is the end of the leave year during that first week of January next year. So this is January 2020. So the end of the leave year for 2019 actually for most federal employees falls on January 4th, 2020. That would be the end of leave period 26 for most of you. Now if you're under CSRS, you might want to retire Friday, January 3rd. That way you've finished out the 80 hours of work for leave period 26, meaning you'll accumulate your last accrual of annual leave. The reason why I say if you're CSRS is because under the old system, your retirement benefit will commence the day after you retire as long as you go out by the 3rd of the month. So you could go out January 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, but since the 3rd is a Friday, also the end of a leave period, that might be the best day for you. Now if you work a flexible work schedule and you finish up your 80 hours by January 2nd, then you can make your retirement effective close of business January 2nd, and your retirement would commence on the 3rd if you're CSRS or CSRS offset. Now if you're retiring under FERS, as most of you probably are under the FERS retirement system, you have to remember that if you went out on January 3rd, there is no 3-day grace period, which means your retirement benefit wouldn't start paying until February 1st. So essentially you would lose a whole month of retirement benefits. So for the FERS employees, I would suggest the end of the leave year no later than December 31st as your best retirement date. So for this year, that would be on Tuesday, December 31st. I know it's kind of weird to retire on a Tuesday, but I say stay till the end of the month so you can get paid your salary all the way up through the last day of the month. That gives you the salary for Monday and Tuesday, and then your retirement benefit starts on January 1st, payable in February. So that's a little bit to think about there. I also have highlighted January 18th and January 31st. Those are both dates that signify another end of a leave period. So Saturday the 18th or Saturday February 1st or even Friday the 31st would be good dates if you want to retire at the end of a leave period. If you're one of the folks who have 5 to 10 years of service, there's nothing wrong with going out January 18th. As long as you don't have a lot of excess leave to cash out, at least you're going out at the end of a pay period. That way you'll accumulate your last leave accrual by working through the end of that leave period. And even though your retirement won't start until February 1st, at least you got paid through the 18th of January. Now if you have a lot more service and your FERS, I would probably say the end of the month is always good. So whether you go the end of December to maximize your lump sum leave payment, whether you wait till the end of January or even the end of February, that's up to you. But remember, the end of the month is going to be one of your better dates. So to kind of recap what I showed you on the calendar, if you're under CSRS or CSRS offset, you probably want to make your retirement effective the end of the month, first, second, or third day of the month, so that your benefit starts accruing the next day. So if you retire on January 3rd, you'll get your first retirement check in February for the rest of the month of January. Now, if you're a FERS employee, you want to have your retirement to start at the end of the month. So that way you retire on the last day of the month so that your retirement benefit starts the first of the following month. So the first, second, and third day of the month is no different than the 15th, 16th, or 17th. So therefore, remember that no matter what day you retire under FERS, you're always going to have your benefit start the first day of the following month. So if you go out on December 31st, the month of January will be your first FERS retirement check. Now that January payment is going to come in February. Just like you're used to being paid your salary 2 weeks behind, your retirement check also comes a month behind. So the check you get on February 1st is the month of January, the check on March 1st is the month of February. So keep that in mind as well. I know it does get a little confusing. Now for this example, this is a different date. We're looking here at the end of August in 2019. And I picked the end of August because August 31st is a Saturday. It's the end of leave period 17 for most of you. So the August 30th date, or Friday, August 30th, would be the end of the month, which would be a good date whether you're CSRS or FERS. That way you'd get your salary for the whole month of August, with your last paycheck probably paid out on September 5th, because you're paid 2 weeks behind, and then your lump sum leave check might arrive as early as September 19th on the next pay date. So during the month of September, you see that you're still getting income from your agency's payroll office because they're paying out everything that they owe you through your date of final separation. Then the following month in October is when you'll expect your first retirement check. Now that first payment from OPM is generally called your interim pay, meaning that OPM has your claim, they're working on it, but they haven't finished it yet. So while they're working on the claim, they'll send you an interim retirement payment so that you don't go a month without any income. So that first payment from OPM should come in this example usually around the first or second week of October. So watch for that, and you will get a mailing from OPM letting you know that that claim is starting to be processed, and you'll start getting pretty regular information from OPM during that time. Now we've kind of finished talking about the best date for CSRS or FERS, the end of the month. For some of you, it might be the first 3 days of the month. So the next thing I want to focus on is when's the best time to take Social Security. So before we talk specifically about claiming your Social Security benefit, I want to talk to you a little bit about longevity. I was listening to some financial planners speaking about planning for a financial future, and they were saying that the biggest threat to our financial security is longevity. Did you ever think about that? That if you live too long, you might run out of money. And some people do, unfortunately. So when you're thinking about your distributions of your TSP account, your monthly income from Social Security and FERS, keep in mind that you want to make sure that those checks last as long as you do, and that end date is hopefully unknown, but it could be longer than you think. So on this slide from the Census Bureau statistics, it's showing that right about now, we have about 89,000 Americans who are 100 years old or older. That's a lot of people, but that's nothing compared to what it's going to look like by 2060 according to Census Bureau projections. 2060, I will be 102 if I'm still here, and according to this, 604,000 of us will be here in our hundreds, can you believe that, centenarians of that number. So if that's true, we need to plan on a pretty long life after retirement just in case. Now before I go on and talk more about the longevity factor and life after retirement and Social Security, I want to introduce you to somebody named Mark Middleton. I met Mark at one of the NARFE conferences in Florida where he gave a wonderful presentation on thinking about growing bolder rather than growing older. So if you're looking for information to give you some ideas about what people are doing in those decades following their retirement, you might want to visit Mark's website, growingbolder.com. But let me give you a brief clip of Mark Middleton.
Hi, it's Mark Middleton from Growing Bolder. Remember when no dream seemed too big, when the future was filled with possibility? Well, now we're led to believe that dreams come with an expiration date. Well, here's a secret. You've been programmed to give up, brainwashed into believing that when your skin begins to wrinkle, your dreams begin to die. The stereotypes of ageism promoted by the mainstream media are embedded in our national psyche, making many of us dread what can be the best days of our life. If your mind accepts the negative stereotypes both types of aging, so will your body. So don't wait for permission from our culture or inspiration from our media to live the life you want. If you long for more, go get it. Happiness is not about age, it's about attitude. It's about growing bolder.
So what did you think of Mark? He's pretty encouraging, right? So if you're looking for more information about Growing Bolder, you can go to growingbolder.com and hear some more video clips that Mark has presented by himself and other experts on aging, including the people themselves who are enjoying those decades in their 80s, 90s, and beyond. Now, as we move forward, I want to show you one more statistic from the Census Bureau that you might find kind of interesting and maybe a little eye-opening. Usually, for the past history in our country, the number of younger folks who are under 18, children, have always been larger than the number of people over 65. We have a lot more young people than we do people over 65 until now. So now we're getting towards the crossroads where the number of people in this country over age 65 are going to start to outnumber the children. And that's going to keep going as our baby boom generation ages. So again, if you look all the way out to the right, by the year 2060, when I'm 102, you're going to see that 23.5% of our population is projected to be over the age of 65, when at that same time, less than 20% will be children. So that is putting a strain, as we've all heard in the media, on Social Security and Medicare programs. But it's also something that could put a strain on your financial security as well if you're one of those folks who's still here in 2060. So we want to think about the fact that we could live a long time or we could die early, we don't know, but we want to make sure that we're planning for either alternative. So when we're thinking about Social Security retirement, think in terms of the fact that most people are eligible for benefits when they're 62, but you can delay your application to as late as age 70 for a much greater benefit amount. Now we're going to talk about some of the reasons why you might want to delay the benefit and some of the outcomes of taking it early or waiting until later. So there's no right or wrong answer here. Some of you may be deciding to get it while the getting's good as early as age 62, and others may choose to delay it till as late as age 70. So there's pros and cons to either end of that timeline. And some of you will do it somewhere in between, perhaps at the same time that you stop working, or maybe at the age when you qualify for Medicare when you're 65. So there's that whole 8-year window when you can decide when to turn on your Social Security retirement benefit. So some of the things to consider when you're trying to decide what's the best thing to do is, number one, is if you're still working. Now for myself, I turn 62 next year, and I plan to continue working, at least for the foreseeable future. I enjoy what I do. I know a lot of people say, why don't you think about retirement? But hey, after 35 years, I finally know what I'm doing a little bit, so I'm going to keep doing it for a couple of more years at least. So if you're still working, remember there's an earnings limit. If you're 62 and you make above $17,640 this year, you're making over the earnings limit. For every $2 you earn above that limit, your Social Security benefit would be reduced by $1. So up until you reach the full retirement age for Social Security, keep in mind your earnings may play a role in when you file for Social Security. So until your earnings drop to that earnings limit amount or less, you may want to delay your claiming the benefit so that you don't lose some of it due to excess earnings. So that's one thing to consider for delaying. Now the second bullet is, do you need the money? Now it'd be nice to say, no, I don't need my Social Security check. And some of you actually do say that. The reason why some people don't need their Social Security benefit is because they have a more generous federal pension. Maybe it's the CSRS retirement, and maybe they have adequate retirement savings allowing them to delay their Social Security. Or maybe you're just working part-time that's kind of taken the place of collecting Social Security for the foreseeable future. So if you don't need the money because you're working, maybe your spouse is still working, or maybe you have adequate other income, then that's another reason to consider delaying the application. And of course, a critical question that we really don't know the answer to is, how long will you live? According to some statistics, the longevity is determined not just by your genes. So your family genes take about 30% of the responsibility for how long you're going to live. 70% is lifestyle. Where do you live? How do you live your life? What type of stress are you under? So those are things that can also factor into your longevity. So think in terms of living a long time, more so than if I die early. Because if you die early, you may not know you missed out, but if you live a long time and have run out of money, that can be a pretty meager lifestyle if you've only planned to live to be 80 and make it to 102. Now, if you're married, there's some special considerations for you and your spouse. We call it a married couple who both have earned Social Security retirement a dual income couple, meaning that you've earned your Social Security benefit in your own right, and your spouse has had a career of their own and they've earned their own Social Security as well. So there's strategies that married couples have used over the years. In fact, some of those strategies are quickly going away, so let me just mention what those are just in case. So there's one that was called file and suspend. So if someone has told you that's what you should do, let them know that Congress took that away in 2016 and it's no longer available. So what file and suspend used to do was to allow someone to file for their benefit, allowing their wife or husband to file on their work record, but they weren't ready to collect it yet, so they suspended receiving it, delaying their benefit, taking advantage of delayed retirement credits. Well, that sounds like a good idea, and it was, but it's no longer available. There's another benefit strategy for married couples that is to some extent still available, but you had to be born before 1954 to take advantage of it. So if you were 62 years old before 2016, then you can file a restricted application on your spouse's work record. So you can take up to 50% of your spouse's benefit and then delay your own application for your retirement maybe till as late as age 70. So if you were born early enough to take advantage of that, that might be something to consider doing. Now, if you're a former spouse, keep in mind that if you were married for 10 years or longer and you haven't remarried, you might have entitlement to your former spouse's Social Security record. I have an example coming up to show you what that might look like. If you have children that are still in school, young children under the age of 19 still in high school or younger, those children are also eligible for Social Security benefits based on your work record when you file for benefits. So if you're 62 and you have a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old, they can each receive 50% of your full benefit amount, where you're going to get maybe 75%, giving you a family total of 175% of your Social Security. Those children can receive those benefits until they're out of high school or at the latest age 19. So that's money you can put aside for their future college expenses or to pay for daycare or any other expenses for their welfare. If you're a widow, you might have some special considerations on the work record of your late husband or your late wife. So a widow can collect Social Security benefits as early as age 60 or at any age if you have young children at home. If you're a widow and you're collecting at age 60, you can continue getting that widow's benefit perhaps until you're 70 before you file on your own work record. That'll allow your earned benefit to grow with those delayed retirement credits. So a widow should look at both sides of that coin as far as whether or not you'd be better off filing for the widow's benefit first and delaying your own benefit until later. So here's the first of several examples I want to work with you and show you how they're going to look. So in this first one, we have Harry and Sally. So Harry has his full Social Security benefit payable at age 66 in the amount of $1,600. His wife, Sally, didn't work much outside the home. In fact, Sally in this example doesn't have her own earned Social Security benefit, meaning she doesn't have 40 credits. So in the first box I have lit up, Harry is filing for benefits at 66 and collecting his earned $1,600 benefit. Sally, when she turns 62, can claim a benefit based on her husband's work record. Now, if she files as early as age 62, she's going to get a portion of his benefit that's less than 50%, maybe around 35% or maybe 37%, depending on what her full retirement age is based on her year of birth. So in this example, she's getting $700 a month, which is actually based on her husband's work record. Now, if Harry passed away at age 81, leaving behind the widow, Sally, You notice here that Sally has now taken over what he was receiving before his death, which is the $1,600 benefit. So instead of just getting a spousal benefit, now she's getting 100% widow's benefit. Even though she claimed the spousal benefit early and took a reduction, now that she's widowed past her full retirement age, she's able to take over 100% of Harry's benefit that he had been receiving. Now, before Harry met Sally, he was married to Betty. Betty was the ex-wife of Harry. Notice that she's also collecting the widow's benefit. In fact, she could even collect a spousal benefit depending on whether or not she remarried after her and Harry's marriage broke up. So Betty and Sally are both collecting from one employee's work record. That doesn't affect anything that Sally's getting, so that's two separate payments. Down the road, let's say Sally decides to remarry at age 83. Even though she remarried, she still maintains that widow's benefit from her late husband, Harry. So she can still remarry as long as she's over age 60 without forfeiting the widow's benefit amount. So remember, you're not going to get your own and your spouse's and perhaps your future spouse's, but you will get the higher of those benefits that you're entitled to. In the next example, we have John and Deborah. So in this example, John is at age 66, entitled to the same benefit as Harry was in the last example, $1,600 a month. But in John's case, his wife retired from CSRS. Her retirement benefit under civil service retirement was $3,000 a month. Now, what Deborah has to remember is that as a civil service retiree who's receiving a pension from work where she didn't pay Social Security, she's going to be affected by the government pension offset, which is going to reduce and oftentimes eliminates her entitlement to spousal or widow's benefits based on her husband's Social Security record. Deborah doesn't have 40 credits of coverage in her own right, so she's not qualified for a Social Security benefit of her own. So she's wondering, am I going to get any of John's Social Security like my friend Sally got from Harry? So Deborah files at age 62 to claim her spousal benefit just like her neighbor Sally did. Well, even though she's entitled to a spousal benefit, it has to be offset by 2/3 of her government pension. So the $600 that she was entitled to is now being offset by $2,000. Luckily, she doesn't owe the difference, but it did fully offset any entitlement she might have had. So in this family, the only person receiving Social Security is the husband, John. He's getting his own benefit, which is not affected by his wife's civil service retirement, but her entitlement to spousal benefits certainly is. Even when John passes away at age 81, she is entitled to the widow's benefit, which would be the $1,600 he was receiving, but again, after it's offset or reduced by 2/3 of her government pension, you can see that it's fully offset, and again, she's not going to get the widow's benefit. Hopefully they knew that ahead of time, because that's a pretty significant loss of income for Deborah to lose that $1,600 retirement benefit that John was receiving every month. So that's going to take some financial planning ahead of time to be sure that she's going to have adequate income when she survives him if she lives the longest. Now Carmen, who was the ex-wife here, I just wanted to point out that she also is entitled to the widow's benefit, even though Deborah's benefit was offset by her government pension. So as long as Carmen didn't have a civil service retirement benefit or other government pension from work that wasn't covered by Social Security, she would be entitled to receive the widow's benefit if she didn't remarry before age 60. So there are some technical rules here. You probably want to review this when you talk to Social Security about claiming your benefit. You can also go to ssa.gov to learn more about the government pension offset if you're going to be affected by it. Now in this next example, we've got Jack and Diane. I think I've heard that couple's name before too in a famous song. So Jack is receiving his full benefit at age 66, or he's entitled to it at age 66, of $2,000 a month. His wife Diane also had a full career of her own, and in fact her Social Security entitlement is even a little higher at $2,600 a month if she waits till 66 to claim it. So what they've decided to do in this situation is that Diane is going to wait to collect hers. She has the higher Social Security benefit meaning she'll get the bigger bang for her buck by delaying the benefit till age 70. You notice it's gone up 32% to $3,432 a month. Now, of course, she didn't get anything up until that point, but she's delaying it for the future. Now, in this example, Jack decided to file for his benefit at his first eligibility at age 62, so he's actually collecting a reduced amount of $1,500 a month rather than waiting until he was 66. So this strategy could work out in the long run because the surviving spouse, no matter whether it's Jack or Diane, will receive Diane's higher benefit as the widow's benefit. So the widow in this case would continue getting the $3,432 for as long as they live. So the odds are that one of the two may live well beyond age 80, which means that might have been worth it for one spouse to delay the benefit even though the other spouse claimed it early. So that's a popular strategy among married couples when one spouse can afford to wait till the later age to claim it. Now in this next chart, I want to show you a little comparison of what if I live a long time versus what if I happen to die early as far as how much total Social Security benefit might you receive. So in this first example, what if you live to be 92? That's 30 years after you become eligible at 62. So if you claim the benefit early at $1,500 a month at age 62, that's about $18,000 a year, and over 30 years, that's over $500,000. So collecting it earlier is going to give you a smaller check, but over a lot more years. If you waited till you were 70 and it went up to $2,640 a month, remember that's when you start receiving it, it's $31,680 a year, so significantly higher than if you had taken it at 62. So that larger check will come for the rest of your life. And if you make it to 92, that's 22 years into the future, you would have received almost $700,000, quite a bit more than if you had started that smaller check at 62. So in this case, it might be nice to have that bigger Social Security check still coming, even when you're in your 90s. But we don't know that we're going to live to be 92, so what if we only make it to 72? If we had waited until we were 70 to claim the benefit, we would have only gotten it for 2 years, only receiving about $63,360. Where if we had taken it at 62, heck, we would have received the benefit for 10 years, a total of $360,000. Some of you might argue to say that if you take it early, even if you don't need it, you could invest it, you could save it. If you do need it, of course, it's going to be coming for all those years to allow you to perhaps retire at a younger age. So you have to think in terms of not just longevity factors, but do you need the money? Are you still working? Those are all going to play into your decision of when to claim Social Security. What's the best time for your neighbor might not be the best time for you. Look at your own family dynamic. Is one of you a spender, one of you a saver? Is that spender going to be left behind as the widow? Do they need the larger check to make sure they have enough income to sustain them for the rest of their life? These are all factors that you have to give some thought to before you claim your Social Security benefit. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with you is your TSP, or your retirement savings. So when it comes time to spend down your retirement savings, how are you going to do it? Are you going to take a monthly check? Are you going to purchase a life annuity? Are you going to continue to save it and just leave it for the next generation to enjoy? So there's a lot to think about when it comes to all this wealth that you've developed through your retirement savings. Whether it's your TSP account, an IRA account, a 401k, or a 403b, these all fall into the category of saving for retirement. So in this pyramid that I've put up here, you have the foundation as the civil service or FERS retirement benefit. And for some of you, that might be the largest piece of that pyramid. The next step of the way up to the top of the ladder is the Social Security benefit. For some of you, especially higher income earners, the Social Security benefit could be a lot less than your civil service or FERS benefit. The reason why I say for higher income earners is because Social Security is a tilted benefit. If you work at a lower wage, you're going to have more replacement of your income in the form of Social Security retirement. But if you're a higher wage earner, the Social Security formula drops off a bit so that your replacement of income is going to be less. That's always been the case when it comes to Social Security, with the theory being if you have lower wages, you probably had less opportunity for retirement savings, but if you worked at a higher wage, at least in theory, there should have been money left over to save. So for some of you, the Social Security benefit could be the larger piece. For some of you, it's the middle or even the smallest. And then I put the TSP at the top as the icing on the cake. And for many people, it is. It's the money that's going to give you the lifestyle that you desire, the ability to do the things you want to do, to travel, to remodel the kitchen, to not have to worry about living retirement check to retirement check. So having a substantial retirement savings account can make life a lot easier, especially in those later years. So what do you plan to do with your TSP account? Maybe you're not sure at this point, and I can certainly understand that, and you're not alone. Are you going to start to use your TSP when you retire? In other words, are you going to fully retire when you leave federal service? If you're a FERS employee, remember that the TSP was designed to be part of your FERS retirement. There's nothing wrong with taking a monthly check from your TSP, claiming your Social Security, and getting your FERS benefit all about the same time. But for some of you, you might decide to work a second career, or maybe even work part-time or do some self-employment after you retire. In those cases, you might want to delay taking money out of your TSP account, allowing that balance to grow tax-deferred perhaps for a few more years, maybe many more years, depending on how old you are at retirement. Now, once you reach age 70 and a half, if you're separated from federal service by then, you're going to face required minimum distributions, which means you have to take a distribution from your account in order to avoid a tax penalty. So be aware of the required minimum distribution requirements, which you can learn more about on the TSP website at tsp.gov. Look for the publication titled Required Minimum Distributions. Some of the rules are changing for withdrawal options this year in 2019. So those changes are going to make the TSP more flexible, a little more liberalized as far as how and when you can take the money out. So one of the changes will be to allow you to take out partial distributions while you're receiving a monthly payment. Something might come up where you need a larger sum of money to cover maybe a new car purchase or maybe a big trip that you have planned. So taking partial distributions during the stream of monthly payments might come in handy for you. You also don't necessarily have to take monthly payments under the new rules. You can take a check every 3 months, or you can take a check once a year. So depending on how you plan to use your TSP account, that flexibility might be just what you need. Now, when do you need the money? That's going to help you determine when to turn on that TSP stream of income. For some of you, you're fortunate that you can live and pay your bills on just your government pension, and maybe you're receiving Social Security, so that takes care of the basic day-to-day expenses. So for some of you, you haven't touched your TSP account even though you've been retired a number of years. Many of you might just do a combination of the above. You might wait a couple of years before you turn it on, then you'll take monthly payments, and from time to time you might have to take a lump sum distribution. Those are all good answers, and it just depends on what life and how life unfolds for you as to how you're going to use that money. Keep in mind, just like with all of your other retirement benefits, taxes are going to be a consideration. In prior webinars, you may have seen Mark Keene talk about taxes, and also he's talked a lot about TSP distributions in a lot more detail. So if you're looking for more information on tax planning or even estate planning or financial planning, check out some of those webinars that we've done and Mark Keene has done on those topics. So you may enjoy those and learn something very important about those other issues related to timing your retirement. But I will give you a little brief overview and a reference here to the TSP publication. It's about 8 pages long that's on tax information when you take distributions from your TSP account. So this publication is going to help you understand any tax penalties that you might incur if you take the money out too early or if you wait too long to take a distribution. It's also going to talk about how much withholding there will be from the payments that you take out of your TSP, whether you take a lump sum payment, a monthly payment, or a life expectancy or an annuity payment. So there's different rules that govern the tax withholding. Also keep in mind the TSP will only withhold federal income tax. If you have a state income tax, you'll have to take care of that in another method. So be aware that the TSP does not withhold state income tax from your payments. Again, you can get more information on tsp.gov on current rules and future changes that might be coming for the TSP withdrawal program. So in closing for today's webinar, not in closing, but in getting ready to show you some examples of the TSP distribution amounts, let's talk about some of the things to consider, especially if you're over 70 and a half at the time you retire. If you are, you'll have to make a decision in pretty short order as far as what you want to do with the TSP. You're either going to elect a monthly stream of income, or you might do some estate planning so that you can pass some of that wealth, or all of it in some cases, on to the next generation or to a favorite charity. And also you want to start calculating what is that required distribution, since that's going to affect your taxable income and maybe even will impact the amount of money you have to spend on Medicare, since that's tied to your total income. So let me show you an example of how the different TSP payout options might play out in your future. So the example I'm going to use is someone who's age 65, who's married, and has a spouse who's age 65. They have a balance in their TSP account that they're going to use for monthly income of $250,000. We're projecting a rate of return for the future of 3%, which is very conservative, but I think it's important not to be too aggressive in what we think the future might hold as far as returns on our investment. Now, if you want to do the same type of illustration that I'm going to do for you today, you can go to tsp.gov and find the Retirement Income Calculator, which is how I prepared these for you today. That way you can put in your age, your TSP balance, and find out how that might play out for you. So in the first illustration, I want to show you the option of taking a fixed dollar amount. So if I tell the TSP to send me $1,200 a month, they will send me $1,200 a month until I'm out of money, or until I change the amount, or until I pass away and the balance then goes to my beneficiary. So if I just kept taking out a steady $1,200 a month and I had $250,000 to start with, my money's going to last a long time. You can see that at the end of the year I turned 73, that year I still have a balance of $177,000 plus. So I can continue taking out that $1,200 probably for as long as I live. But in reality, you'll probably change the amount from time to time. You might even reduce it if you go back to work, or increase it if you get older and need more money to offset inflation or healthcare expenses. So you will be able to make changes to that dollar amount from month to month under the new withdrawal options. You can tell the TSP to calculate the payment for you based on your life expectancy. So this way the payment amount will change from one year to the next. The life expectancy payment is based on a life expectancy chart that's used by the IRS. So at age 65 with a $250,000 account balance, you would receive a monthly payment starting at $992 a month. At the end of the first year, based on our 3% projected rate of return, your balance in the account would be $245,000. The next year you'll be 66, so the life expectancy factor for a 66-year-old is a little bit less, and they'll divide that into the balance at the end of the previous year, increasing your payout to $1012 a month. And that recalculation goes by every single month. Now I wanted to point out to you in this chart, you can see a drop in the payment that happened at age 71. That's due to the required minimum distribution chart being substituted for the original life expectancy chart that was being used prior to age 70 and a half. So that required minimum distribution chart gives a life expectancy that starts out at 115. So I guess they're thinking ahead at the IRS that some of us may make it that long. So in that case, they're dividing by a bigger number, so your payment amount goes down. Now, if you decided that you wanted to continue getting the larger payments and you really didn't think you're going to make it to 115, you could change the life expectancy payout to a fixed dollar amount where you just simply tell the TSP how much you'd like to receive. And that's something you can change even though you've started receiving this one particular option. Now, I also wanted to tell you something about the TSP annuity option. The annuity option is where you're going to take money from your TSP account, either some of your balance or even all of it, and convert that to a life annuity where your money would leave your TSP account and be sent to the vendor of the annuity option, which is currently MetLife. Now, MetLife is going to purchase the annuity for you based on how much you use or how much you give them and how old you are and what factors you want to have that annuity to have. So some of the things you can purchase the annuity would be an annuity that has a cash refund. That means that if you don't live long enough to return your original investment, then the balance of that original money that you turned over would go to your beneficiary. Another version of that is called 10-year certain. That means that that monthly payment from the annuity would be paid out for 10 years, whether you're here or not. So if it's the survivor who's getting the payments, that would be your beneficiary who would receive those payments for 10 years. Now, if you live, of course, you could receive those payments for life even if you live 30 years. The level payment increasing payment option, that's going to allow for inflation. So you either can take the same payout for the rest of your life or to allow it to increase by as much as 3% a year. Now, the increasing payment is capped at a 3% increase in a given year. So if inflation happened to run higher than 3%, as it has in the past, you would only get the 3% increase. If inflation was less than 3%, say 1.5%, then that's what you would receive for that year. So there is a built-in inflation, but it is capped. The joint annuity allows for you and a spouse or you and another joint annuitant, it doesn't necessarily have to be a spouse, to receive a survivor benefit. The survivor benefit can be 100% payment, meaning that the payment doesn't change whether there's two of you or one of you, or you can do a 50% survivor election, which means that while there's two of you, the full payment is paid, but when there's one of you, no matter which one survives, the survivor payment is cut in half, 50%. Now, the interest rate for the annuity is fixed at the time of purchase. So a lower interest rate is going to mean a lower payment. A higher interest rate is going to play more favorably into your payment. So in May of this year, the interest rate was fixed at 2.65%. So if you bought the annuity that month, that would be the lifetime rate the annuity was based on. The interest rate has been higher. Going back to 2018, it was 3.25%, and it's been lower back in 2016 when interest rates were fixed at 1.375%. So if you had bought the annuity back in 2016, even though interest rates are higher today, well, that's kind of too bad because you fixed your annuity at the 1.3. So you can see how annuities might be more popular when interest rates are higher and less advantageous when rates are lower. So that's been the case with the TSP in recent years as we've been experiencing relatively low interest rates. But here's an example. If we were to use a 2.5% interest rate index to compute this annuity, and somebody started receiving the payout at age 65 with a balance of $250,000 used to purchase the benefit, it would play out like this, given some of these different features that we're adding in. So with all four of these, we've added the increasing payment feature to offset inflation. And the inflation amount that's factored in year by year is 3%, although remember, like I said, if interest rates are lower, you would get the lower amount. So with a 100% survivor option, meaning that whether there's two of you or one of you, the joint annuitant would still continue receiving the same payout even as the surviving annuitant. So that payment starts at $777 a month and goes up with inflation every year thereafter. In the case of a 50% survivor benefit feature, the payment would be a larger amount initially, but that's only while there's two of you. When there's one of you, that payment in the second column would be cut in half or 50% of what you see. So if both of you live a long time, then the payments would continue at the higher amount. But if one of you dies early, the surviving beneficiary is going to get only 50%. It's going to take a lot longer to recover that $250,000 with the 50% feature. So be careful about that one and make sure you understand what that really means. On the next one, the third column over, it says 100% survivor with cash refund. So it's a little smaller payout than the first column, because that says if both of us don't survive long enough to receive what we paid in, then we can leave the balance of our original investment to our beneficiary. And the same goes with the 50%. It's still a higher benefit initially, but if there's one survivor, the benefit gets cut in half. And when both joint annuitants pass on, if there's anything left of the original principal, that would go as a lump sum to the beneficiary. So that's 4 different features. There's many more to choose from, so you can look at the TSP withdrawal booklet, which outlines all of these features and what they entail, and you can use the retirement income calculator to run an estimate like this for yourself. So those are ways to kind of think in terms of what kind of income can I receive from my TSP. Some people will use their TSP and Social Security on somewhat of a seesaw, meaning that initially they might take larger distributions from their TSP account, allowing them the income to delay their Social Security claim. So that way, once they turn 70 and Social Security starts coming, they can cut back on their TSP payout. If you purchased a life annuity, you wouldn't have that flexibility. But if you took a monthly payment from the thrift, you can increase or decrease the payment as needed. So that's going to give you more flexibility than what the annuity would. Once you purchase the annuity, that's for life. On the other payment options, when I showed you those, going back to the life expectancy or the fixed dollar amount, those you can change. So keep in mind the flexibility could be a factor when you're making a choice as to what to do with your TSP. In closing, we're about the end of our hour now. I wanted to just recap some of the things we talked about. We talked about choosing the best date for your CSRS or FERS benefit. To help you with that, you might want to request a retirement estimate for maybe 2 different dates from your agency's HR specialist. In every agency, there's someone who has the task of preparing retirement estimates. Sometimes they're called a retirement counselor or a retirement specialist. So if you haven't done that yet, that might be something to put on your to-do list to get started with this decision. So you can talk to that person and request that estimate. And oftentimes that's going to be something you request online or even over the phone if you don't have a local HR office in your area. Now, we also talked about the fact that financial planning is all tied into choosing your best retirement date. You want to make sure that you're not only eligible to retire, but you can afford to retire. So if you do need help with financial planning, make sure you hire someone who's a fiduciary who's going to look out for your best interest. They might have the letter CFP behind their name, which stands for Certified Financial Planner, like our Mark Keene, who does our webinars here at NARFE, or they might have RIA, which stands for Registered Investment Advisor. Both of those signify that they are fiduciaries, and they're responsible for making sure their decisions they're assisting you with are going to be in your best interest financially. Now, of course, you may not need to hire somebody because you are your financial planner. Up to this point, you've probably done a pretty good job, so now you just have to change gears and start thinking about financial planning for the future in the years following your federal career. So maybe you just need some education to help get you started and figure out what to do next. Tax planning is one of the most overlooked areas of retirement planning. So be sure not to forget that you're going to have to pay income tax on your civil service or FERS benefit, on your Social Security benefit, and on your distributions from your retirement savings. That includes federal and oftentimes state income tax depending on where you live. So check the state tax rules in your state to find out if you have to pay state income tax on your retirement income. Most of you probably know that every year in April, NARFE magazine has their state tax roundup. So if you look back at April's issue of NARFE magazine, you can get a good overview of what states tax and don't tax your retirement income. Estate planning is another big important part of retirement planning and can help you decide when you're ready to retire, especially if you're thinking in terms of long-term care planning and inheritance and even charitable distributions. So keep in mind, retirement planning starts with your benefits, but might bleed into financial planning, tax planning, and even estate planning. So I wish you a lot of luck in the future as you plan for your retirement, And as I mentioned before, stay tuned for our online chat that's going to follow my presentation, and I will answer as many of your questions as I can. Don't forget, we archive the webinar so you can go back and review them. And also, if you have future questions, you can always contact NARFE Federal Benefits Office at fedbenefits@narfe.org, fedbenefits@narfe.org. So it was a pleasure being with you today. Hope to see you again sometime, and stay tuned for the chat. Thanks for attending.